In this episode, we will talk to Garrett Eucalitto, Deputy Commissioner of Connecticut DOT, about the new bipartisan transportation bill and how it impacts Connecticut. And we'll talk about new technology, climate change and resiliency, safe streets, and much more. Hi, this is Abul Islam. Welcome to my podcast, Bridging Connections. Today we have a very knowledgeable and exciting guest, Garrett Eucalitto. Garrett is the Deputy Commissioner at the Connecticut Department of Transportation. Garrett has over 2 decades of experience in public policy related to transportation, transit, electric vehicles, and legislation associated with autonomous vehicles. Has been in Connecticut a lot and also has been in Washington, D.C. in his a long career of over 2 decades. So we'll talk to Garrett today about the bipartisan infrastructure bill and what Connecticut will get out of it. And it's exciting news that how we have the opportunity to address finally our bridges, highways, transit, and rail. And then we'll talk about other items too, including innovative transportation, gadgets, devices, policies, procedures, and we'll talk about resiliency and climate change, how it affects our infrastructure. And we'll talk about safe street, connected cities, and much more. Welcome to Bridging Podcast, Garrett, and I truly appreciate and thank you for taking the time to come to our podcast here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, thank you. So let's get on with the first question, the topic, and comments or whatever you can talk about. The big thing that we're all talking about, the landmark bill, in the Jobs Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and hopefully it'll become a law. We are all excited and hopeful. And Connecticut will get somewhere between, as a minimum, $3 to $5 billion in the next few years to address our long infrastructures of bridges, highways, rail, and other areas. So I'd like you to just give us a sort of snapshot about this funding distribution with regard to the segments of the transportation infrastructure we have, and what are the new areas of funding that we can count on.
Absolutely. And I'm hopeful that by the time someone's listening to this, we'll have more progress down in Washington. But it's exciting that it was a bipartisan bill passed by the Senate. And it showed that there's clear dedication to addressing the backlog of infrastructure projects we have in our country. And everyone knows that Connecticut has our amount of projects that we have long wanted to do, but haven't had the chance to execute on. So it is going to be a huge increase. It's the largest increase since the Interstate Highway System Act moved under the Eisenhower administration. It is going to be probably around a 38% increase in federal formula funds for the state of Connecticut, just in the first year. So if it passes within the first federal fiscal year, our federal funds will go up 38%. Then after that, it's going to go up a few percentage points each year after that. So that's a great opportunity for us to address that backlog of projects we've been wanting to accomplish and undertake, but also things that will have an opportunity to think differently about addressing the infrastructure projects in our state. The Senate and Congress really did think differently about this infrastructure bill. They looked at ways to focus on the state of good repair as a priority. So, for instance, they have a brand new bridge program. And while we normally have all the different sub-accounts in the federal highway funding, they created a whole new, brand new federal formula program dedicated to addressing existing bridges, going in, repairing or reconstructing those bridges, resurfacing, and addressing some of the issues where maybe the culverts are undersized, trying to address that problem, which leads to significant flooding in a lot of communities. So that bridge program is a brand new program we're going to receive in Connecticut by the formula portion, a little over $500 million for that over 5 years. But then there's also a competitive piece too that we can apply for with larger bridges, so we can actually get more money than that. They have other programs that they have some innovation programs in there focused on safe streets for all, which I definitely want to dive into a little bit more with you. That's going to be opportunities to address safety for all users of our system, There's a new program dedicated to specifically addressing culverts, which we've never seen before. They want to help address the backlog of culverts that need to be replaced across the country, to help eliminate some of the flooding that occurs due to undersized culverts, because the water just backs up when they approach those culverts. But then when you think on the public transit side too, there's increases in funding for low emission and no emission buses. There's increases in funding for rail, significant increase in funding for rail, to dedicated funding for the Northeast Corridor. Both Amtrak has some, as well as intercity rail in the Northeast Corridor for states to apply for. And then also there's funding dedicated to doing a lot more research as well. There's a pilot program embedded in the bill to do a national pilot on mileage-based user fees, or road use charges is what they call them out west. So states have been piloting with new methods of paying for infrastructure. And there's really been no consensus yet as to what eventually can replace the gas tax in our country. But where there has been consensus is right now you consume gasoline or diesel, and that how much you consume is based on how efficient your engine is, how far you drive. So other states have been testing mileage-based user fees, so charging drivers based on how far they drive, how many miles. So in this bill, there's a national pilot to test out how that would work at the federal level. So that is really important research to try and address 20 years from now. How are we going to replace how we pay for infrastructure in this country?
I never thought of that one. That's a big question, that we primarily pay through the gas tax, as a basic mode of funding. As the car industry is changing,
Exactly.
How are we going to just have the future funding, with regard to that? So this is pretty illuminating for me. So I'd like you to take a minute or two to talk about the mega project, how much funding, because when I saw the pie chart, on the 95 decongested area from New Haven to Greenwich line, and also 91 in Hartford, to how much funding is there, and what are the mega projects that is also under serious consideration with this money?
Yeah, the mega projects category, it's it's not as large as it could be given it's focused on mega projects, right? So you need a large portion of funding, but it is going to be a competitive grant program, multiple billions of dollars available across the country. And that's where we're going to have an opportunity to apply for hundreds of millions of dollars for each individual project over the lifespan of this bill. We do have large projects like that in Connecticut. We have projects in the Hartford region, 84 and 91. We have right now undergoing the Greater Hartford Mobility Study, which is looking at how do you redesign transportation system of all forms through the Hartford region, not just city of Hartford proper, but the ring communities as well, because they're all impacted by the transportation network. So those are the types of things that the mega projects are possible to be pursued. If we can get 1% of the funding that's available, that would be a win in our books, $500 million or something. But we think we can do better than that. We have a lot of projects in the pipeline currently undergoing studies, ways to improve safety on the highways, where a lot of the highways were undersized, or the on and off ramps are geometrically not up to today's standards. So it creates conflict points for vehicles entering and exiting, and leading to crashes, backlogs, congestion, delays, unsafe conditions. So those are the types of things we can do. Another mega project is obviously Waterbury, the Mixed Master project. We have a great project going on right now to extend the life of that project, because we just didn't have the resources to take on such a massive. When you talk about mega projects, that's a mega project. So that's one of those projects where we were extending the life of that multiple layer bridge structure, while we are able to look at 84 and 91 is probably the next big mega project to undertake.
Wow. So next question is about the rails, the commuter rails, especially connecting CT rail with Metro North, time for CT and all that. How much money is there and what can be done? Somebody was asking me a question a few days ago that there are 8 service from CT Rail to New Haven, can those be increasing frequency now that we have the station and all that, and then have more frequent trips to New Haven, and then again upgrade Metro North services and all that. Anything on that?
Yeah, so rail is going to be a great opportunity. Most of the rail funding is not formula funds, so it's not going to be dedicated to Connecticut. But what they did in the bill is they have funding for Amtrak, and then they have funding for intercity passenger rail.
Yeah.
And they also, in each of those buckets, where there's tens of billions of dollars in each bucket, they dedicate a specific portion just for the Northeast Corridor. So we, in the past, have been pretty successful going after one of the grant programs is called CRISI, and another program is called Fed State Partnership. And both operated out of the Federal Railroad Administration. And we did receive funding last year under both of those competitive grants. One for the Walk Bridge project in Norwalk. Another one, we partnered with Amtrak on their application for funding for the Conn River Bridge out in southeastern Connecticut over the Connecticut River. That's an Amtrak property, but we are completely dependent on that bridge as well for our Shoreline East service. And frankly, we in Connecticut are dependent on Amtrak service as well. If we were to lose Amtrak service on our Northeast Corridor, that's a huge economic hit to us as a state. So seeing Amtrak succeed with replacing the Conn River Bridge will speed up travel times. Seeing us succeed on the Walk Bridge and executing that project faster will help us and it'll help Amtrak and all of the commuters up and down the Northeast Corridor. So those are types of examples where through the funding that's coming through for Fed State Partnership Program, the CRISI grant programs, the Northeast Corridor grant programs, all of these are going to be competitive grants where we're going to look to partner with Amtrak, with the MTA Metro North to go after funds to address our movable bridges. We still have more movable bridges to address. We have the Saga Bridge over the Saugatuck River, the Coscob Bridge, and the Devon Bridge. So those all have to be addressed. And then we also want to address, Governor Lamont issued his Time for CT plan on how to address increasing speeds on the New Haven line. And the big portion of that is, not the big sexy projects like the movable bridge, but the big piece of how you can do that is addressing all the mud spots out there, doing some slight improvements where water's pooling on the tracks or next to the tracks, improving some track geometry to straighten them out a little bit, and addressing a lot of the fixed undergrade bridges, which right now are wooden. If you replace them with concrete ties, you're able to go faster over those undergrade bridges. So those incremental changes can really speed up service on the New Haven line. And we think by next year, launching some new express service on the New Haven line, we'll be able to cut off about 10 minutes of time off of someone's commute from New Haven to New York. As we finish more projects, we can take another dozen or 24 minutes off of that commute time through addressing those mud spots, undergrade bridges, addressing the Walk Bridge, the Saga Bridge definitely needs to be addressed as well in the short term. So there's a lot of opportunity there. We have a great partnership with the FRA Administrator, Amit Bose. Commissioner Giletti is actually very close with him. We also have a very close relationship with Amtrak and the president there, Stephen Gardner. So we're in constant communication. And the good thing is Governor Lamont issued Time for CT, gave us the direction, get some projects ready to go. So things are already in design now so that when the federal bill passes and then after the FRA will issue their regulations and issue the RFPs for their bills or for the grant programs, we'll already have projects ready to submit. So we're in a good position there to address the rail infrastructure.
This is so good news. I've been a long-time Connecticut resident and all that, and I've never seen the level of cooperation that Connecticut DOT has with Amtrak, especially with all the monies that are coming in. So this is great news for all of us to straighten out the corridor, the Metro North corridor from New Haven to New York border, And there's a limitation on that one. It's just not like flat land. It's a historic limitation that we have with all the curves that we can have a limit of the the 100 miles max, and you
Exactly.
can't go like the European or the Chinese on a flat land, with the high speed, real high speed. But within that parameter, a lot is being done. So that is very exciting news.
Yeah.
All the improvements that is being done.
Well, and then you look at the Hartford line.
Right.
So the New Haven line gets a lot of the focus, but we are going to be launching in July additional service on the Waterbury branch. We finished the sidings and the signalization there, so it's up to current standards now. We're going to increase the number of trains on the Waterbury branch, and then the Hartford line. That's a huge success story, and I don't think people in Connecticut realize that only became possible because of the previous stimulus package, 2009 infrastructure ARA Recovery Act and stimulus bill. That helped pay for the Hartford line. Without that, it wouldn't move forward. And then when you go back and look at all the projects that received rail funding under ARA, the Hartford line is it's the only project that received rail funding that's actually in operation today. So that's a huge win for Connecticut. And we have the stations open. We're going to be going out to bid and then breaking ground in early next year on the Windsor Lock station that we're going to relocate. And then we hope to finish the double tracking, not do from New Haven to Springfield full double tracking. We'll pare it back a little bit, cut the cost in half, and be able to, if we do the double tracking in certain choke points, we'll be able to increase the number of trains per day up to 44 trains per day on the Hartford line. And that line actually can maintain speeds up to 110 miles per hour in certain segments. So it's going to be a great opportunity to increase productivity and economic activity in the central corridor of the state.
This is so great, and we've been following it since 2008. The ARA project all the way to the next 13 years. Look what has happened. Things have changed from one track between Hartford, Springfield, and now it is moving forward big time. So this is exciting news.
Yeah.
One quick point about if you want to comment on we are all have modality as a concept and has worked for us and continue to work for us, various modes of transportation. Now comes the thought process of mobility, bicycle, sidewalk, a lot more emphasis on those things in our urban areas. How do you see the balancing act or reconciliation between so much emphasis, especially in our urban areas with regard to mobility, that widen the sidewalk, give more for the bikers path and all that, versus just a mode, airports, train stations, highways, roads, all that thing. How do you see that balance work out under this funding?
No, that's a great question, and I think the infrastructure bill does drive home that point, exactly what you brought up. They did create that program, Safe Streets for All, like I mentioned, but they also are pushing the state DOTs and pushing the metropolitan planning organizations to look at mobility rather than transportation. Right, you're a Department of Mobility in many ways because you are serving all users of the system, and you go back 110, 125 years, you had the sidewalks were everywhere. The streets were used by horses, and then later on you had the trolleys, all electrified, serving, right? And then over time we went away from that. So getting back to having accessible transportation systems, accessible communities, is really key to how we can use these funds. There is going to be funding in the bill dedicated to making transit stations ADA accessible. We at the DOT have stood up a new ADA coordination unit, Americans with Disabilities Act coordination unit. We have some staff in that unit, and their whole job is to go out and ensure that the projects that we are doing are ADA accessible. We're in the process of doing a statewide project at every single intersection that is on a state road that has crosswalks. We are replacing the ramps with ADA accessible ramps, making them safe, making sure the pedestrian signal heads and the buttons are ADA accessible. So it's a conscious effort at our agency to address that accessibility. But you also have to think about in cities like Hartford, where a third of the residents don't own a car, they need to be able to have the same flexibility and same economic mobility, right? To be able to apply for jobs where the jobs are located. They shouldn't be limited in their economic progress based on the transportation options that they have. If they don't have a car, they should still be able to have the different jobs to apply for. They should be able to take a bus to get to school or to work. They should be able to walk to a grocery store, take a bike, and they shouldn't fear for their safety when they're doing that. So we in Connecticut, the legislature this year, we were really pleased that they supported our request to do $12 million a year in dedicated funding for our community connectivity grant program, which is focused on investing in communities to improve accessibility, mobility, and safety. That those local governments have come to us and said, this is where we want to invest. It's basically making permanent the program that we stood up under the previous administration and distributed around $30 million, so a total of 90 grants. Now we have a permanent line item in the capital budget that the legislature passed, establishing that program. So that's a huge win for safety improvements in our state. But we also need to address technology. And when you're a user of the system, you don't want to have to juggle multiple apps on your phone to figure out where you're going or how to get there. And right now in Connecticut, we don't have a seamless integrated system. And that's something that I really want to take a look at is mobility as a service, right? Where you can have a unified portal, unified app for someone to be able to find directions to where they want to go, purchase their transit ticket, rent a bike share, all coordinated through one access point, so that if you come into town to visit, you don't need to download 3 different apps to be able to park, to be able to rent a bike, to be able to rent a scooter in Hartford, or get on a CT Transit bus, and then a CT Rail. Hartford line has a different app. MTA Metro North has a different app. So that's what mobility really can be. So
great. My next question would lead into the same, the electric charging station
Okay.
with equity, with those living in the urban areas versus those in the suburban area, access to charging station. Yeah. And it is a reality already. Tremendous, cars are coming in our roads, all electric cars too, and therefore the need for charging, not just in the highways, and we all see the Tesla sign, but how about the urban areas such as the cities are? What are the plan, if any, for the charging station in urban areas? Because people live in apartments, and they have to be able to charge their car if it's all electric cars too. So can you shed a little light on those? And it's a question of equity,
yes,
just like you were talking about the ADA accessibility and all that, Yeah. So would you kind of talk about that?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think the excitement around electric vehicles, the early adopters all lived in homes where they were able to install a charging station in their garage or in their driveway, right? Because you're essentially establishing a fueling station at home. And then we saw electric vehicle charging infrastructure begin to deploy in certain locations. It's expensive to install. So you'll have vendors come and place it at places of high traffic areas, such as we have Tesla stations on the highway service plazas. We have level 2 chargers in many city government buildings, which were paid for by the Department of Energy Environmental Protection using some of their funds. And then commercial chargers, which are the high capacity, heavy duty DC fast chargers. Those cost a lot to install, a lot more than just a level 2 charger. So that's where you see companies like Electrify America or EVgo or ChargePoint. And they are generally in more commercial areas in like a shopping plaza or something. But for individuals to be able to begin that transition over, they need to be able to charge at home, right, or close to home. So having something for those who live in multi-unit dwellings, having an opportunity to charge, either have on-street charging for residents in urban communities to be able to pull into parking spots on the road and charge, or if they're in a condo complex or an apartment building, there should be some opportunity to charge in those garages as well. And that we as a country haven't cracked that yet. because we've been most of the funds have been focused on helping to pay for the cost differential to buy the vehicle, and then it's almost been like a bias that people have a place to charge at home. They can plug in at home. Well, like you said, a lot of people can't. So we, I think as a state, need to work with our federal partners, and hopefully through this infrastructure bill, there is a new EV charging program in the bill. Connecticut is slated to receive around $53 million over 5 years for that program. There are limitations in it. It has to be spent within 5 miles of an alternative fuel corridor. So for us, that means 95, 91, 84, and the Merritt Parkway, and partially Route 7. So, but that does encompass, when you look at 5 miles on either side of the interstate, that encompasses a large portion of our communities. So there's going to be a great opportunity to make those investments. We'll want to partner with the utilities to find a way to encourage siting, to be able to balance that load demand that may be out there and make sure their grid can accommodate it. And we've started doing that internally at the DOT. We created a new sustainability and resilience unit in our policy and planning bureau. And we're actually recruiting right now for a third person to join it. But they did a full deck analysis of looking at every single charger that's out there in the state, where they're located, and then overlaid it with a bunch of different layers to look at the equity, to look at how far you can travel, and how really focusing on DC fast chargers, because level 2s will be easier to deploy. But the DC fast chargers, there are very large gaps in Connecticut right now. They're very few and far between. So we need to build that out. And I think level 2s will really need to be focused a lot of some on-street, some multi-unit dwellings to allow people to charge overnight. But if you're going to do a long road trip in Connecticut, we need to have some DC fast chargers interspersed throughout within certain intervals. And so we've been partnering with DEEP, Commissioner Katie Dykes and her team, and actually talking a lot with PURA, the utilities regulator here in Connecticut, and Chair Marissa Gillette, a real amazing forward thinker. They've been doing a lot of work. They issued a ruling setting new rate structures for light-duty vehicles, and telling how utilities are going to be able to interface with the private sector and with governments to help build out the infrastructure. But then also they're looking now at medium-duty and heavy-duty charging too, during a docket that's open. So there's a lot going on, and we're going to have money to invest, but we don't want to throw good money away. We want to make sure we make a smart decision of where we invest that.
This is great. Right now, what we see these days in highway rest areas is Tesla charging station, which has an interoperability issue. Not everybody can afford Tesla.
Yeah. And that's because Tesla has the resources where they are paying to install those themselves, right? Whereas, and I think that's where they have had the competitive advantage in the vehicle marketplace. And I'm not a vehicle expert, but if the vehicle manufacturer is deploying all those charging stations, you as the driver feel comfortable that you can always find a charge somewhere. The other vehicles, and I will admit I own a different electric vehicle. It's not a Tesla, but those vehicle manufacturers, they did not do that. And I think that was probably because they thought the private sector charging entities would be there to fill that gap. And there are some there, but they're not as moving as fast as Tesla did.
Okay, while we are on the subject of electric vehicles, we like to continue this on the buses. That with the mandates that we have by 2030, to reduce the greenhouse effect in Connecticut, legislative mandate, and under that to do more reduction of the greenhouse on our buses, in the Connecticut Transit or any other vehicle. What is the plan to install those, to make them fully electric, our state buses,
Yeah, so we, the way Connecticut's public transportation system is structured is Connecticut DOT oversees the brand of CT Transit. CT Transit operates in Stamford, New Haven, Waterbury, Hartford, Meriden, and a few other communities, and like the surrounding communities. So those are the hubs, and then we serve those surrounding communities. We do have additional transit districts in the state of Connecticut, which are operated and managed by the communities that make up those districts. So Bridgeport has the Greater Bridgeport Transit District. Southeastern Area Transit is in southeastern Connecticut. And then there's like Milford Transit, Norwalk Transit, a few other small ones. But so CT Transit is the bulk of public transit in Connecticut. And we've made significant strides in securing federal funds to pay for the back end work we need to do to convert those garages over. So if we're going to convert, we have 740 buses in the CT Transit fleet. Those are 40-foot buses. Those are the, I think, 65-foot articulated buses, 35-footers. That's a lot of buses in our state, and they're always in heavy use. So if we are going to convert all of the bus garages to accommodate the electric load to serve those buses that being converted to battery electric buses, there's a lot of electrical work that has to go in. There's a lot of coordination with the utilities to ensure that their grid that serves those facilities can accommodate the demand charge. I was told that if we convert our garage in Hartford, which is in the north end of Hartford, near Liebert Road, and if that is fully converted to serve all of the buses stationed there, and they all charge at one point, we're going to need 5 megawatts of drawdown in order to be charging all of them at once. And that's a lot of drawdown from the grid, and so it's going to require a lot of upgrades in the infrastructure inside the building and outside. And we've gotten federal grants to do, they're called low-no grants. We've gotten them to do conversions in Stamford, in Waterbury, and in New Haven. And actually today was our first ride of a battery electric bus in the CT Transit brand. Lieutenant Governor Bysowitz and I were at the event this morning, cord cutting the bus, and we took our first ride in it. And so it's the first of what is going to be 740 battery electric buses in the CT Transit fleet. We have another 10 arriving this year by the end of this calendar year. We have options on orders that we can execute to move forward in the next year or so on about additional 40 buses. And I have gotten the question from members of the public, like, why can't we just do it now? We're going to have all this infrastructure funding. And the way the Federal Transit Administration has their rules in place is that we are actually not allowed to put a bus out of service or scrap it before the life expectancy of it, right? So the FTA has deemed that the average life expectancy of a transit bus is 12 to 13 years. So if we get rid of that bus early, we have to pay the federal government back because we use federal funds to buy them. So we're starting this year with our first battery electric buses, and over the next 15 years, we expect all 740 to be cycled out. And so every time we get rid of a diesel hybrid, it's going to be replaced with a battery electric bus. So starting today.
Wow, this is so good news. That is happening. Then you don't have to get rid of the buses because they cost money.
Yes,
you can't just junk them like that. Yeah. There's a useful life for the 12 years that you explained. Let's talk a little bit about the connecting the cities. Connected cities, if you will. Hartford is a great example of what we are doing with all the mobility study that is going on. I mean, there are other cities around the country, that what kind of funding will be there, this is a massive undertaking. When the highways were constructed, everybody knows in the 60s and 70s, they created the big barrier in the cities in the middle. I-84 is a perfect example. And now we need to undo that one to bring the communities together, and make them connected, the parks, the neighborhoods, and the people. What could be possibly done in the Hartford is a good example. I mean, there are Stamford is in much better shape than Hartford is with regard to dividing the city into two, a highway in the middle of that. What could be done under the new infrastructure funding for doing that, connecting the cities?
Yeah, so President Biden, when he was running during his campaign, he, as part of his platform, he had reconnecting communities as a piece of his infrastructure platform. And so we were really pleased. We knew that, Hartford, Connecticut is probably one of those best examples where it's been separated by 84 and 91. So 84 was cut through Hartford, separated in half. And then they also built 91, which separated Hartford entirely off from its water. And, I think kudos to riverfront recapture and the work that they did over decades. And Joe Marfuji, who I knew really well, the leader of that organization, to bring Hartford back to the waterfront. But there is a lot more that can be done to reactivate that waterfront and give riverfront recapture more space to provide more recreational opportunities. And the same thing connecting north and south, North Hartford with downtown and south and the south end. We recognize at the DOT that is a goal of ours, is to undo that scar there. And in the infrastructure bill, there is funding in there. It's not as much as we would need to accomplish this. I think it's a total of $1 billion. It's a competitive grant program. So we obviously will need to leverage a lot of other funds that are available in the infrastructure package for the mega project cycle, for our formula funds. But I think we are going to be in a good place because Congressman Larson, this is his top priority to address. I know Mayor Bronin talks about this all the time. There's civic organizations involved already working on this through the Hartford 400 group. And I think where we are in a good position is we several years ago were working on just looking at 84, right? And we paused that effort and then pivoted to 84 and 91 and looking at all modes of transportation, not just how to address the highway. So through the stakeholder meetings we've been doing, community events, going out to meet the public where they are and talking about what do they want to see for mobility options in the greater Hartford region. There's been so much discussion about greater bike accessibility, pedestrian access, transit access. And then we know that whatever we do, we're going to have to address the rail infrastructure because right now there's a significant curvature of the rail line through Hartford, and it serves Union Station, and it's not well situated to have higher speed service through Hartford. So we're going to have to relocate the rail station in some form. It currently goes over a single track over an old brownstone viaduct that needs to be relocated. So there's a good opportunity as we address all the infrastructure to address that as well. So it's going to be a whole host of funding sources that can make this a reality. But if you look at what's happened in New Haven, where they have the downtown crossing project, where they've slowly, bit by bit, started to undo that Route 34 stub highway, right, where they've been doing air rights over the highway bit by bit. Alexian Pharmaceuticals, it has a building over the top of what used to be the highway. And they're reconnecting the grid to reconnect downtown to the Hill neighborhood. Orange Street is now going to be reconnected. The signals are all there. They're blinking right now, but by the time someone listens to this, there'll probably be operational traffic signals. So that's been progressing, and I think that's just an example for other cities in Connecticut as to how they can do that. Middletown is obviously going to be another place where we're in discussions about how to address Route 9 there as well.
This is great. This is great. Now, I know about, everybody knows, and anybody who lives around the Hartford area, about Congressman Larson's plan to create the tunnel. It's a fantastic idea if it could be done, but you have only $1 billion. That will cost $5 to $10 billion. And we if we could come up with the money, that's the best solution, long term. But we have only $1 billion, and there's a lot of reality. Study has been done,
Well, I think that's the good thing about the way we're approaching this is we're using a federal process called Project Environmental Linkage, the PEL process, where it's allowing us to do this organic engagement and slowly go through this federal process to determine, to look at the alternatives that are out there and look at the considerations. So that will allow us to do some early action projects. So we will probably early on identify things that we can cherry pick out and be like, you know what, the PEL identified this as something that should be done. Federal grant opportunity is up. Let's do this. So that will, instead of waiting for the whole thing to be designed and packaged with a bow, ready to go out to bid, we can start cherry picking things. 10 million here, 50 million here. Do things that will make discernible, real improvements in the lives of the everyday residents. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My next question is about the innovative technologies. If you can make a big comment, and there's some monies I saw in that for drone technology, which we have been practicing, and many in the industry has been practicing for almost 6-7 years in everything that we do, and it has a tremendous potential to really make our conventional engineering, surveying, inspection, all the things that we do, and it's labor intensive. Can it really save a lot of money and still be a much more reliable result? So, what is the funding with regard to the drones or the innovative technology, and how is the DOT thinking to expand that?
Yeah, so we at the DOT, the private sector partners like AI has been ahead of us in that effort, right? Where the private sector has come to us and brought us along with the benefit of this. So thank you for the work that you've done to educate us on these technologies, and I think the federal government is now coming along as well. And there is funding in there to encourage adoption by the DOTs, encourage utilization. And what they've actually indicated to us is that in the federal grant opportunities that are being issued, there is now a scoring category of innovation. So they want to know how you are innovating with technology or with alternative financing. So that is a line item now in the grants, and it will continue to be under the Biden administration as they issue the RFPs or the NOFOs for the federal grants. They're now weighing how innovative the state DOT is going to be. So by using drones in some of those projects, that's going to give us a leg up. And they have funding opportunities in there to do more study in terms of deployment. In the past, they had funding to do, I guess you could call them test bed areas, like upstate New York is a test bed area for drone technology. And Connecticut really hasn't taken advantage of that. I think it's partially the way that we're constructed in terms of aviation has been spun off and it's housed with the Connecticut Airport Authority. And they do a great job at running our airports and keeping a safe system going. But that testing and policy space, they don't have time or resources to manage that. A state like Utah, on the other hand, Utah has really taken drones and UAS to the next level. Same with North Carolina DOT. They have a whole drone unit inside their DOT. Utah has taken the step of actually establishing corridors. They've identified drone delivery corridors. So they're preemptively saying to the industry, as drones begin to be utilized for alternative uses, such as delivery of products or even just traveling between areas, we want them to be funneled through this corridor. They don't want them flying over houses. They want them to fly over the roads instead, or they will in this corridor. So they've been working with their local FAA officials to establish that. I think that's what the feds want to see more of, is that innovation, thinking about how you can encourage the adoption of the technology through that type of program. But then also, as we apply for the competitive grants, are we using the drones to do some of the bridge analysis, right? To look whether the cracks are appearing, whether the cracks are growing, right? If you do the same scan, the same flyby and scan every 6 months or so, what are you seeing that the human eye can't see, right? Because the cameras on the drones are so effective and so much better than the human eye in terms of using the different technology and the different lenses. So that's what the feds are looking for. And I think Connecticut, we have just trained up 12 more pilots in our agency. We used to have 2, so we're spreading the wealth around. We're taking the burden off of our 2 pilots to encourage them to get out there. We still are going to require our private sector partners to do the bulk of it for us, but there'll be a case where one of our engineers will say, "Hey, can you go out and look at what's going on with the drainage in this area? I can't see it from the side of the road. I can't get down there." Easy, we'll send someone out, one of our pilots out there to fly it and see what's going on with the drainage. Same thing with going under the Rochambeau Bridge. We just took a whole crew of our legislators who serve on the Transportation Committee. We took them out to the Rochambeau Bridge on I-84, where we're doing a project, and we showed them what drones can do in terms of bridge inspections. And they were fascinated. They especially like the little drone landing pad. But it's generating excitement. And what we've heard is that's an area where we need to begin to train the next generation of students to, encourage engineers coming into university that, look, these are the technologies that you might want to look at, or even younger than that, like start training kids on drone technology, and the mechanics of it and how they actually, and the physics of it and how it works.
Very good. So actually, we have 12 DOTs that we have direct relationship with,
Right.
contract with, and bridge inspection and evaluation, and then we see different level of drone understanding and expertise and all that, and we are also aligned with the universities, research universities, to do exactly what you just mentioned, to do the umpteenth mapping of the crack, rather than sending a crew of 3 people for 3 weeks. Just do it
Exactly.
within 24 hours, and the reliability of the information is as good or even better than a human inspector measuring and evaluating and monitoring those cracks from every 2-year cycle and all that. So a lot of those things are going on in addition to the drones, fancy software that you plug it in and all that. So things are happening, and
Yeah.
I'm so glad that finally Connecticut DOT has 12 FAA
Yeah.
certified inspectors. So that's
Yep.
good news. Second last topic, I would say, I have the climate change and resiliency, is very, very important. 300 line of coastline for Connecticut, uh, protecting them, and in any kind of infrastructure planning upgrade. What are you going to do about them with the frequency of the floods that we have? And B, the low-lying areas in our urban areas.
Yep.
Case in point, it's the recent flash flood storm with Ida and all that, and suddenly people are taken by a suddenness and storm of their vehicle underwater suddenly.
Exactly.
How we are going to take care of this resiliency in transportation design and construction, especially with the new projects that we are undertaking now.
Yeah, it is going to be one of the most important things we address moving forward. You look at the capital program at the DOT, we're talking over $1 billion a year, right? Being invested in infrastructure in Connecticut. And we want to make sure it's being done wisely and that it lasts. We don't want to build something that 10, 20, 30 years from now needs to be torn out, reconstructed because it was undersized, it wasn't built to the right standard. And that's partly why we built a new unit in our Policy and Planning Bureau, focused on sustainability and resilience. We recruited an amazing talent in to lead that unit. She used to be the state's hazard mitigation officer. So when she previously worked in state government, her job was to work in the Division of Emergency Management, Homeland Security, overseeing all the FEMA grant programs, focusing on how can we ensure that we mitigate future storm hazards. So how can we upgrade our infrastructure to make it more resilient to future storms? Always thinking 50, 100 years out. So we stole her and brought her back to Connecticut state government to work with us at the DOT because we are the infrastructure owner, right, in Connecticut. Yes, other state agencies have buildings, but most of the infrastructure that's owned by the taxpayers of Connecticut is under the care of the DOT, and we want to make sure we're doing it right. But then when you look at the communities and how Connecticut grew, we're seeing flooding occur more frequently at higher levels, and partially, for instance, there was frequent flooding in the past couple weeks in certain areas of the low-lying coastal areas because of the new moon, the full moon, and the tide, the high tide levels. It being November, it was the highest tides of the year. So these areas were flooding, and we never saw that before. You talked about Ida, the remnants of Ida. We saw parts of the state flood and buildings. We actually had one of our maintenance buildings. It's been there for over 50 years, never flooded in over 50 years of operation of that building. But they had ankle deep water flowing through their building, which, it shows that we need to rethink placement of our buildings, design of the facilities and the roadways. And as we're going back and addressing how to reconstruct, let's build it to the higher standard. And we need to build it to the higher standard that, thankfully, in Connecticut, we have great partners at DEEP as well as at UConn. They have a group called Circa, which is doing really detailed and localized analysis of to what we can expect with sea level rise and high water rainfall events. So working with them to try to advance the resilience factor. We need to go back, and this is where the infrastructure bill is going to be very helpful. Go back and address all those culverts that are, some of them are already, they're corrugated pipes and they are probably rotted away. We need to go back and replace as many as we can find, build them to higher standards to accommodate greater rainfall events so it doesn't back up. And then looking at, our infrastructure as exists, our roads and our rails, a lot of them were built along waterways because 100 years ago when they were building out the infrastructure, the waterways were used as a place to dispose of chemicals, to dispose of human waste. So no one wanted to be oriented toward the water. So everyone turned their back to the water. All right. So that's why treatment plants were placed there and highways were placed along the rivers and railroads were placed along rivers to turn your back to the water. Well, now that's leading to washouts of some of the infrastructure. And we need to make sure that we are partnering with our feds, and we need to ensure that the feds will allow us to take that into consideration when we apply for grants. If we're going to apply for a grant for a higher dollar threshold because we need to build to a higher standard, we need to make sure that we're not going to be penalized when it costs a little bit more to build it better. And thankfully, we're not seeing that right now. But it is a risk. Anytime there's a change in administration, they may take away the ability of the states to build better, and they might want you to just build to the baseline, right? Build to this baseline. That's what works today. That's what we're going to pay for. Well, we need to be able to build for what's going to work 75 years from now, based on our current projections. So it's going to be a community conversation. We're going to need our municipal partners to have that conversation with their residents about ways that we can improve resilience. There's projects currently underway to do that. In Bridgeport's South End, there was a federal grant to do some more resilient infrastructure to protect residents down there. We are looking at the new program. There's two new programs, or one new program in the federal infrastructure bill. It's called the Protect Grant, and it's focused on protecting our transportation infrastructure, making sure it's resilient. And we're really excited about a project in New Haven where there's two different components to it. One is to address the stormwater flooding that occurs during rainfall events, even moderate rainfall events where the stormwater comes south and begins to build up and flood the entire Union Avenue near the train station, the Hill area. You'll have water almost up to your knee at times during a moderate rainfall event. So the city of New Haven has a proposal to improve the pumping there and to address the outfall into the harbor. But then they've also worked with the Army Corps of Engineers to do a large-scale resiliency project where they will make the whole Long Wharf area, which is all built on fill. That used to be water. To make it green infrastructure, put a berm protecting the entire Long Wharf area from any major flooding events. So the Army Corps of Engineers has that listed as one of their top priority projects. We're talking over $100 million project for that. But that would be one of the single largest resilience projects we've seen in Connecticut. And it's going to protect our infrastructure in the rail yard, that's where our huge rail yard is. So we're really excited to see the city of New Haven succeed at that.
So good to know.
Yeah.
But my comment is there's a socioeconomic angle in urban areas, underserved communities,
Yep.
disadvantaged communities. A big storm, flood hits for days and all that, and you live from paycheck to paycheck.
Yep.
You have much less capacity to weather that one. Light is gone for a week in an apartment.
Exactly.
And all that. So the level of importance in resiliency, infrastructure resiliency, in my opinion, is far more important in those urban areas where a lot many people are living, as to the disruption that is caused by those things, and to minimize that one.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. The last point is, all of this thing is great. We're getting money that we have long waited for to address our big infrastructure, small infrastructure, and all that. but the question is, where are the people? And that is a question of capacity, of supply chain issues that we are going through. And 2022 is not that far, 2023, 24, 25, for the next 4 or 5 years. The private industry is facing this thing across the board. Every industry, not just the engineering, construction, just general contractors, suppliers, everybody's facing that one. Even actually the Silicon Valley, and they came up with a new word just a couple of weeks ago, reskilling, meaning that you can give overtime and this and that, but what next? How do you have an X amount of force, and you have all this huge work coming up. So you have to think creatively with regard to building your capacity to put these projects together and successfully execute them. A, that's an industry-wide problem, public and private. B, the public domain, DOTs, many DOTs, just not that. Also by 2023, the baby boom, generation is retiring, taking them with a lot of skills, And so how do you think that the marketplace will evolve to deliver these big projects in the next 4 or 5 years, critical 4 or 5 years, with so much challenges right now, post-COVID, all the things that suddenly happened in logistics problem of the goods and supply chain problem everywhere, from steel to timber and everything, every construction material that you can talk about. How do you see that one? It's an industry-wide problem. I mean, nobody, it's just to say that consultants or this contractor has all the people will address the problem. It's not the case. Nobody has the people to address that one. So how are we going to manage this one in the time frame? What do you think?
Yeah, it's you're right. It's a national problem, but at Connecticut DOT, it is a very acute problem. We have about a third of our workforce is going to be eligible to retire in 2022. That is, just so much experience that is able to walk out the door, and dedicated public servants who have done so much to advance infrastructure in our state. We are right now in the process of trying to accelerate the human resources processes, trying to begin the process of recruiting now, to get people, because it does take several months to fill a position. If I was to post a position today, it could be 4 to 6 months before that person is sitting in a seat in the agency. So we are starting the process of trying to get things posted today for those individuals we know are going to be retiring in April or July of next year. So that's part one. Part two is we've approached the governor's office and the Office of Policy Management to talk to them about, if the infrastructure bill comes to fruition, a 38% increase in our federal program, that can't be absorbed by the current workforce at the DOT, even if you put aside the retirement factor, right? And so we've laid out the case to them as to how many more staff we need to bring on board at the DOT in a whole host of fields. It's not just bringing in engineers, it's bringing in fiscal staff, it's bringing in environmental planners, it's bringing in those individuals who can help deliver the project in the contracts and agreements section, making sure that after we issue an RFP and a contractor is selected or a consultant is on board, that those contracts are not held up for 6 months or a year beyond when they should be out the door, right? We want the private sector to get to work as soon as they have the green light. So it's a whole host of jobs that are going to need to be filled and increase capacity. So that's part two. Part three is, we've held one briefing for the consulting community to try and spread awareness of, here's where we as the DOT think we might have some more workload and projects coming on the horizon. We've started doing a we have our published capital plan. We have a new capital plan 2.0, essentially, that will be ready to publish to indicate over the next 5 years how much work will be out there. And it's trying to spread awareness because we know that the private sector, all 50 states are going to be competing for the private sector's interests, right? So we need to do our part of selling that to the private sector and say, you should look at investing in Connecticut, because I think we're going to be in a position to put more work out the door than other states, because we started under the previous administration, that Let's Go CT initiative, where there was a lot of funding available to do some preliminary design work, begin to do the engineering for some projects, getting them in the pipeline. So now we have things that are ready to go to construction in the next few years. We can accelerate those and then put more into design to fill that bucket. So I think we're going to be in a good position to try and lure some more focus or spotlight, because we do have some of those mega projects that are going to be a lot of hours of focus. So, and we're going to do our part to try and, we're actually started traveling again as state employees, going out to conferences, trying to do meetings, trying to attract more interest of be like, hey, look what Connecticut's doing. Look at the workforce we have here on engineering, on the contractor side, on the labor side, in the private sector. We want your companies to invest here. And then talking to the supply chain is really the part where, we're going to really lean on our federal partners to try and unlock that, because we are growing increasingly concerned by that. Right now, our projects are not hit by the supply chain issues, but I know it's coming. Right now, we're having trouble getting bumpers for buses, which normally people wouldn't think is like, really, you can't get bumpers for your buses? But yeah, like we can't roll out some of our buses into service because the bumpers haven't arrived. And so it's those little things that people don't think about that are going to start to add up. And it may conflict with the goals of Congress and the administration and us as the DOT and Governor Lamont to get as much work out the door as possible. It's just there is that concern. It's perfect confluence of events there. So we know that we can't do anything. We can't achieve what we want to achieve without the private sector at our side, partnering with us to help deliver this program. Without our partners in labor, we've been going out and talking with them, making sure they're ready and they know what's coming down the pike as well, so that we're all working together to ensure that we can deliver. We in Connecticut can't fix the supply chain, right? We don't have a major port to untangle, but we can try to solve everything else that could hinder the infrastructure program and support our other partners on the supply chain side. So personnel, resources, all of that are all the things that we as an agency are focused on to ensure that we're in the best position possible to spend the money. That's what, if they're going to hand out some funds, we want to be able to spend that money. So
that's so good to know that Connecticut DOT and you are actually planning to do an outreach to everybody, industry partners, consultants, contractors, suppliers, proactive outreach to how we all band together and solve this and then deliver. So that's so good to know. Hey, Garrett, I'd like to thank you very much for coming in Bridging Connections and sharing enlightening viewpoints, about our transportation, and I thank you very much. All right.
Yeah. No,
thanks a lot for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and those who like the program, please like, comment, or subscribe, and we'll be coming up with another series of Bridging Connections soon.
The Bridging Connections podcast is brought to you by AI Engineers.